يعلو الكتاب ويخبو سواه وينصر جندا ألح الدعاء. يعلو الكتاب ويخبو سواه وينصر جندا ألح الدعاء ألح الدعاء.
Saying all of that, it still very much feels like, as a community, we are held as a suspect when such incidents occur. And as a result, there are calls from people, from the public, for us as a community to look within ourselves as a community and try and combat extremism from amongst within ourselves, as we as a community are the problem. And there's calls for a counter-narrative to combat what's labelled the extremist ideology. So quite naturally, as a community, given this environment and this climate, we must feel maybe on the defensive, quite confused and concerned about what the future would be for Muslims in Britain. So it's entirely appropriate that we hold such events, such discussions, for us to sort of ask what questions or and discuss the concerns that we may have and discuss a way how we can move forward given the current climate. We're joined by Dr. Abdul Wahid, speaker to my right. Dr. Abdul Wahid is the chairman of the executive committee of Hizb ut-Tahrir UK. He's already spoken in national conferences in the country already and has for years spoken publicly on such issues in public talks and in the media. Dr. Abdul Wahid will inshallah speak for around 25 to 30 minutes, and then after that we shall open it up to you guys, and there'll be an opportunity for you to discuss what concerns you have, comments and any questions that you may have. So inshallah, after that there'll be refreshments inshallah, and it should give us lots of time for next Maghrib at the masjid inshallah. So without further delay, I'll pass it over to Dr. Abdul Wahid.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. I start with ayat of Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطيع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Ahzab, the 33rd Surah of Quran, addressing the believers, all of us. Believers, ittaqullah, fear Allah, have consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, and speak words straightforwardly, directly, to the point and correctly. Okay? So Allah's telling us believers, one of our characteristics should be we fear Allah, and with that fear of Allah, we speak things very frankly, honestly, truthfully, and frankly. And Allah says, يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُم. And if you do that, Allah will make your actions correct, and He'll forgive you your sins. وَمَن يُطِيعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, and the one who obeys Allah and His Messenger, فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. The one who obeys Allah and His Messenger is a great, great, great success for them in the Akhirah. Okay, so we are definitely a community in this country under huge pressure. Okay, in the last month, that pressure got worse. And I think most of us, when you face this kind of thing, you just wish the problem would go away. We would just rather not say anything rather than speak. But the problem with that is that there is a lot of political agendas going on. And if we don't speak what's truthful and factual and correct, we're going to be just a victim of other people's games instead of setting an agenda ourselves. So with that in mind, I think it's very good that we're meeting today. In the last 1 month, since what happened in Woolwich, okay, definitely you can say at the least amongst the non-Muslim public, our neighbours, there's more suspicion of Muslims. And at the worst, you see like the English Defence League with their protests and people attacking Muslim sisters, people attacking mosques and this kind of thing. And then amongst that, we're used to the tabloid media, Islamic terrorism, Muslim terrorism, always linking Islam with violence every opportunity. And then you also have the politicians who continuously exploit the issue. Okay? And that's important to understand, because when you read what the politicians are saying in public and you read what they're saying in private, you can understand more of what's going on here. The most prominent one who spoke in the last 2-3 weeks is Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, who wrote a big article in the Daily Telegraph. And he, like all the politicians, Tony Blair, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, they all start with, I have a great respect for Muslims. Most Muslims in this country are peaceful, law-abiding citizens. Okay? That's how they start. Right? As if, imagine if I'm going to start criticizing one community in this country, black people, Asian people, women, elderly, doesn't matter who I'm going to criticize, if I start off by saying, I have great respect for most black people, right? But then, after having said that, I can really stick the boot in, because I've just made it clear that I'm not against everybody, I'm just against certain people. He did that, and the others do that. They start off with, I have great respect for most Muslims, and then he stuck the boot in. And when he stuck the boot in, he said very clearly, he said, these people, in one article, he went from these people who killed a soldier in Woolwich, who believe in issues like, and then he listed a whole load of issues, which actually, if you go to any imam in this country and ask them, is there something in Islam called jihad, called sharia, called khilafah, called ummah, Muslim ummah? Are these things, existent in Islam? They say, yes, these things are in Islam. Right? So he said the people in Woolwich and people who believe in these kind of things. Okay? He didn't say people who do jihad in the streets of London. He just people who believe in these kind of things. These are people we want to get rid of, we want to deal with in universities, in mosques, in madrasas, in etc., etc. Mosques, universities, madrasas, I don't believe they had anything to do with the two guys in Woolwich. I never heard that these guys got radicalized in some university. I never heard they went to any madrasa in this country. And I never heard that they had anything in the mosque. But immediately linking these things, so starting with this murder, and then going to these issues of Islam, then talking about mosques and communities, and then finally talking about Abu Qatada. Abu Qatada, they call the radical cleric, who they're waiting extradition. So what he's got to do with it, Allah only knows. But you've got this article which is making this argument. And it's making an argument which they've made in this country for the last 10 years. The more political you are as a Muslim, if you talk about Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, Kashmir, these kind of issues, the more political you are, the more dangerous you are. Okay? The argument they're making. And the more Islamic you are, if you pray, if you fast, if a woman wears hijab, if a man has a beard, if you go for Jummah, if you have in a gathering like this, separating men and women, even now, if you've seen some of the newspapers, they complain about this in the universities, when some Islamic societies, they have the brother sitting one side, sister sitting the other. This is now called extremism. Okay? So the more Islamic you are, the more dangerous you are. This is the narrative. Okay? And this is a very dangerous narrative, because actually, if you think about it, it means that the one who dares to speak up about an important issue in the world, even speak about it, is being labelled extremist. And the one who is more practicing in Islam, who wants to follow Sunnah, or sister wants to dress like a Muslim sister, or sit separately, or talk about the issues that Boris Johnson talked about, Sharia, Jihad, Khilafah, Ummah, these things, immediately you're going to be called an extremist. And you're just one step away from being accused of being a terrorist. And that's the danger if we stay silent. Okay, so this is why we have to actually think about this as a community. And when I say as a community, I mean those Muslims who are, if you like, part of national organizations, right, who speak on the TV, who come on the TV. Those Muslims, them, I've spoken to them personally, and I know them, and they're our brothers, but I have advice for them. I have advice for those Muslims in our local communities who are linked to mosques, linked to schools, madrasas. I have advice for our youngsters, because there's advice specific to our young Muslim brothers and sisters. And then there's some general advice for all of us about how we deal with non-Muslims and actually how we face this challenge ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Because this pressure is a test on us from Allah, and we have to know how we bear it in front of Him. When I spoke to some of the people from the leading Muslim organizations, my advice to them was, you know what? You could have said this was wrong. You could have said this action was not from the right way of changing Islam, without speaking in a way that accepted blame. Okay? Because when you come out and you say, we condemn in such a way that everyone watching you thinks you're guilty, and you're trying to push the blame away. You have to say, to some extent, every Muslim wants to make it clear this has nothing to do with Islam. At the same time, you don't go to a point where you're accepting blame for the whole community, because then the policy is not going to just take these two brothers that did this wrong action. It's not going to just deal with them through the law. It's going to deal with all of us. If you accept collective blame, there's a collective punishment. And this is a big danger for us. And we'll see in months to come. At the moment, the Prime Minister has said there's going to be a task force that looks into this. Some of the people he's appointed on that task force are very hostile to Islam. So when they come and report, it will be on all these issues which have nothing to do with these two who have done this. As I said, mosques, universities, madrasas, nothing to do with these two. Right? What led these two? But there will be policies for all these things. This was my advice to them. And it was advice that came because for more than 10 years, there have been people advising governments in the US and the UK and in Europe about Islam. And they actually wrote reports, think tanks who write papers and publish them online. You can go and read them yourself. In the UK, there's one called Civitas. It's an organisation that's run in London. It has close links to the Conservative Party. And 10 years ago it wrote a report about Islam in the West. And it concluded in one paragraph, which said, it's not enough for the vast majority of decent, peaceful, law-abiding Muslims to renounce terror in principle. So it's not enough for you and me, according to them, it's not enough for you and me to say that killing people in the UK is wrong. That's not enough for them. They went on and said, if they choose to live in Western, liberal, democratic societies, they must accept the values of liberal democracy as Jews, Sikhs, Hindus and others have done for many years. So what this means is, if you're against murder, terrorism, or killing, or any of these things, that's not enough. You have to become westernized. That's the plain speak for this. You have to adopt the values of this society, and then you're okay. All right? That's the argument. And then they put down plans the government should follow to try and westernize Muslims more. So some of the things they put in schools, some of the regulations of mosques through the Charities Commission, some of the ways Islam is dealt with in the media. All of these things, they put them down. And in America, the leading think tank there, called the RAND organization, published a huge, hundreds of pages report. And in that report, it didn't talk about Muslims in the West, it talked about the whole Islamic world. And they said, you know what, in the Islamic world, more and more Muslims are becoming practicing, and they have more and more feeling for Islam. And we have to do something about that, because if we don't do something about that, we'll lose control of that part of the world. Okay, at the moment, we all know that the governments in Saudi Arabia and most of the Middle East countries and in Pakistan and Bangladesh, we all know that they actually serve more the agenda of Washington and London and Paris than they do the Muslims in those countries. So they said, you know, if the feeling for Islam grows up, those people will get removed. And you'll have some kind of Islamic state there, and we won't have any control on it. So we should promote the less Islamic people. We should promote the more westernized people in those countries, fund them, back them, promote them, and actually that should be... So it's not just a policy for the UK, it's not just a policy for America, it's a policy across the whole world. They wrote this very openly, how they should do this. In fact, if you look at the way they talk about Syria on the TV, they start saying there's the rebels and there's the government. And 2 years ago they were saying this government is the Zalim government. It's oppressing the people, killing the people, bloodshed of peaceful protesters. All right? And now 2 years later, they see that those rebels, actually, mashallah, they're very good people, people of Syria. They went out into the street peacefully, and they got paid with bombs and imprisonment and torture, and their women were dishonored, and all these things. So then, when they were attacked, they fought back. Okay, and when they fought back, mashallah, they didn't say, wave the Syrian flag. They took the flag, which is the flag of the Prophet ﷺ. Either a black flag or a white flag with kalima written on it. Because they said, no, everyone's forgotten us, we only have Allah. And when they had their armies, they named their brigades, like one after Khalid bin Walid, one after Salahuddin Ayyubi, one after Umar ibn al-Khattab, one after, like this. So when they started to see that, the Western media and politicians, they start saying Al-Qaeda has come to Syria. Okay, so the Al-Qaeda story starts. Al-Qaeda is in Syria. And then now if you listen to the news, they say, we don't know whether to give them weapons or not, because we don't know if they're good guys or bad guys. And in Turkey, in Cairo, in Qatar, they meet with people who they think are the more westernized ones, the ones they can play with, all right? Because they're worried about what will happen if this. So you can see this way it's going. This is the game. And you know what, brothers? When you see what's happening in Woolwich, you have to understand, and anything that happens in future, God forbid, Allah forbid, if we see future things like that, or anything that happened in the past, you'll see the same game happening. They'll link the violence to Islam, and then they push you in one of two camps. On the one side, like I can say in the red corner, you have the nutters, right? The Muslims who come, who say angry things, who are encouraging the violence, the one who did the killing, all this stuff. So they put them on, right? So the ordinary Muslim sitting at home watching the TV or in the mosque, he thinks, look, I don't want to be linked to them. I don't want to be linked to the ones who killed the soldier. I don't have any love for the British Army, but I don't want to be with those people who killed a soldier on the street when he's wearing plain clothes. Yeah? So that's the ordinary Muslims thinking that. On the other side, they put on TV somebody else who says, you know what, these people who killed this soldier, they believe in this, they believe in this, they believe in this, and Muslims should distance themselves from these ideas as well. So you shouldn't believe in the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You shouldn't believe in the idea that there's something called jihad. You shouldn't believe in the fact that we're one ummah around the world. And they say this. So you've got these two camps. Either you're with them or you're with them. Right? And in the pressured environment, of course, the ordinary simple man and woman is going to feel more comfortable if he's not with them. Yeah. Right? And actually we need to find a way. This is my address to our community leaders. You should speak to your imams, people in mosque committees, local people. This is the need. We have to find a way of speaking about Islam honestly, truthfully. قُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. Yeah? Speak straightforward words about what we believe, what we don't believe, without being pushed into the camp of the nutters, you can say, or the camp of the ones who are compromising and trying to actually change the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, no differently to say people have done in the past. There have been many people who have tried to twist the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger and change things. So you can take any one of these issues that I said Boris Johnson labelled. He takes the issue of jihad. Either you're supposed to believe that what happened in Woolwich is jihad, which it's not. All right? Or you're supposed to believe jihad is nothing but jihad al-nafs. Okay, and if you believe that, then Badr, Uhud, Fatul Makkah, Salahuddin Ayyubi liberating Palestine, Umar Mukhtar resisting occupation in Libya, The Muslims in Kashmir, Muslims in Palestine, Iraq and Afghanistan, all of these are nothing, right? If you believe that. All of this is gone, right? This is, how can this be right? We are Muslims. We know there's one thing which teaches us in Quran and Sunnah. And if you believe, if you know, in fact, shouldn't we, I believe those brothers in Woolwich who made this mistake. I believe if you allow in our communities more opportunity to discuss the things that people are worried about, you actually help to guide people like that rather than to letting them get into a position where they just check on Google what they can and can't do. Yeah, there's imams who've said since this happened, we are too scared to even mention the word jihad from the minbar. Why? Because we'll get accused of being extremist. Yeah, so if that's the case, how do you expect young people to even know what is right and what is wrong? How do you expect young people? We had a system in Islam where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his successors knew that Allah gave a reason when people can fight and not fight. He said when you're allowed to fight, when you're not allowed to fight. When you're allowed to send an army, when you're not allowed to send an army. And when you're allowed to sell an army, this is what we call jihad fi sabilillah. And when you're not allowed to, this is the treaties, the peace treaties, fuqaha wrote books on these things. Okay. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, before he sent an army, he said, go forward in the name of Allah, don't kill an old person, don't kill a child, don't kill a young person, don't kill women, don't transgress the limits or steal, and reconcile and behave well, for Allah loves those who do good, whenever he sent an army out. But our imams are too scared even to discuss this issue because of the pressure in the community. Surely we should be going out and saying to people, you need to discuss properly, not what happened in Woolwich, not just this media stooges that come and say what they're paid to say. Actually what Islam says on these issues. Surely we should say, when they talk about ummah, right, in the one corner, if you believe we are one ummah, right, and that they want you to believe that if you're one ummah, and your ummah is being attacked in Afghanistan by British or American soldiers, that now everybody in the street, including an old woman or a child or anybody, their blood is legal. Right? That's the false narrative on one side. And the false idea on the other side is that, this idea of ummah, it's old-fashioned. All right? We now live in Britain. We are British 110%. Yeah? When the Queen comes on TV, we stand up, we say, God save the Queen. Sing God save the Queen. And actually, you can see the pressure. I don't know if you know, but some mosques, after what happened in Woolwich, they opened their doors. They said, you know what? We want to show how British we are, so we're going to raise charity money for the British soldiers. Okay, look. I don't think that any Muslim should go and kill a British soldier in the UK. All right? I don't think that. But if I believe that, it doesn't mean to say I suddenly hug every British soldier like he is my beloved. I know people here respect their soldiers a lot. So I don't have to go out and rubbish their soldiers in public. At the same time, I don't have to embrace their soldiers in public. Yeah? There is some way in between that a Muslim can be honest and truthful about having loyalty to our ummah, yes, who is maybe suffering, and at the same time, this Sharia of Allah ordered us to be good to our neighbours wherever we are, whoever they are. When Rasulullah ﷺ gave the hukuk, the rights to the neighbours, he didn't say those rights are if they're Muslim neighbours. He didn't say that. He said neighbours. Your neighbour might even be a soldier. And hukuk are still, his haqq over you is the same. Doesn't mean to say you start supporting an army of occupation who's oppressing the Muslims. At the same time, this Sharia, you can't pick and choose. So my message to the the elders in our community who have links to our mosques is encourage discussions allow these discussions to happen. Because if you don't, you will see more young people just doing what they want to emotionally and going into Woolwich. And that brings me on to my message to the youngsters. You know, for us, for a young Muslim, you can see this stuff on TV or on the web about Syria, about Afghanistan, about Iraq, and sometimes hideous photographs emailed round of victims. And you'll feel angry, you'll feel frustrated. And wallahi, that's the right feeling. Nobody can say that if you see these things, you shouldn't feel angry. But the Muslim doesn't act on their emotion. The Muslim who feels angry acts according to what Allah and His Messenger says. It's not right for a Muslim just to go from feeling upset and angry to acting on that upset and anger. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a way to change a situation. And that's the way you follow. You can't just pick and choose. Allah said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O believers, young, old, men, women, children, udkhulu fis silmi kafa. Enter into Islam completely. Alright? So the Islam that tells those Muslims in Palestine and Kashmir and Iraq and Afghanistan to defend their land, and it does tell them that, is the same Islam that tells you and me that you can't go and do what you did in Woolwich, that you have to be good to your neighbours, that you have to follow certain rules in how you change things. And Allah gave a method for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, إِنَّمَا الْإِمَامَ الْجُنَّةِ. Only the Imam, the Khalifa, is a shield. يُقَاتِلُ مِنْ وَرَائِهِ وَيُتَّقَى بِهِ. The Khalifa is a shield, you fight behind him and you defend yourselves by him. When we see zulm in the Muslim world, Allah's Messenger gave a method of how to end that zulm. And it wasn't by taking the law into your own hands, it was by having a state and a ruler that uses the army to defend people, just like any other state and ruler does in the world. And those Muslims who feel for that should support those people and work for that, rather than take the law into their own hands. Indeed, he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, with his own Mubarak eyes, saw his Sahaba and Sahabiyat being tortured in front of him. You know, you've heard the story of Yasir and Sumayya, the first martyrs in Islam. Sayyidina Yasir and Sayyida Sumayya. And Sayyida Sumayya, most brutally tortured, and even she was, when her limbs were being pulled apart by ropes, the Prophet ﷺ saw that, and he said, Sabr ahli Yasir. Have patience, ahli Yasir. Jannah will be yours. He didn't group together the 100 or so Muslims in Mecca at the time to liberate them by force. But when he established his state in Medina, he did use his armed forces to defend that state and to carry Islam. And we need to understand that. And you can see, if you don't talk about these things, how will young people know about these things? We have a duty here. I'm going to wrap up now. We have a duty here as Muslims collectively, right? When you see people like the English Defence League, when you see the slander that the media and politicians make on Islam, it should remind us of something. Allah ordered us to give da'wah. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal mu'idati al hasana. Call to the way of your Rabb with hikmah, with wisdom, and the best words. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And debate with them nicely, in a good way. Don't have to just say, accept wrong things. You can discuss and debate with them, but in a good way. You know what? If we follow this command, you will be doing the very work that is necessary here in the UK for us. To actually be speaking the truth, explaining to people about Islam, and actually, in the same time, explaining what we believe and what we don't believe. I'm sure in a town like Woking, there will be non-Muslims here who will be just have 100 questions in their mind they'd love to ask you, but they're too polite to ask. You'll have a few that say abusive things, definitely. But the majority, the silent majority, they will have 100 questions to ask you, but too afraid to ask. It's one of the reasons why we started this No Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam campaign, all right? Because it's through this you can actually explain honestly, truthfully about Trent, a very small town, I think probably similar size to this town. They had 2,000 people on one weekend at very short notice. And in Birmingham, mashallah, they had 12,000 people come into the mosque. And although the majority that came were Muslim, there was a substantial number of non-Muslims in each of these places, and several people who took Shahada, mashallah. In fact, more women took Shahada than men. That gives you some idea. And they weren't afraid to talk about any of these issues. In fact, you'll find if you try and do an exhibition or talk about Islam without being ready to answer, well, what does Islam say about terrorism? What does it say about fighting? Well, I opened a copy of the translation of Quran, and it said this verse talks about this, this and this. How do you explain that? If we're not capable of answering those questions, and we can't just hide away from these things, you have to actually be able to answer them in a way that's truthful, honest, and at the same time, convinces the person you have a valid view. You're not all nutters, basically. And we have to do that. That's essential. Brothers, this is a big test on us. These ayat from Quran, Allah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. The one who does this has a great success. Then he explains afterwards what the test is. Right? This test, the pressure on Muslims. You and me were under a test. Right? Allah says, ليعذب الله المنافقين والمنافقات والمشركين والمشركات ويتوب الله على المؤمنين والمؤمنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما. This test Allah sends, right, to separate people into two categories. The ones who betray Islam, or the one who denied Islam, whom Allah will punish. And the ones who stand for Islam and stay true to Islam, the believers who Allah will reward. And he says, وَمَنْ يُطِيعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ and he says, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا وَيَتُوبَ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. And Allah will turn in acceptance, mercy, accepting our tawbah from the believers who have stayed firm. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the Ghafur Rahim. It's a test on you and me. Alright? And so in this test, the ones who want to change Islam, the ones who want to betray Islam, or the people who are out there attacking Islam, they have to answer to Allah. Right? And those of us who are sitting in one other side, we can't just be silent. We can't just. It's not actually Muslims that are just under attack. When you see the mosques burning down, when you hear the story of the sister who's been dishonored, these are true stories. There are Muslims being attacked and Muslim communities being attacked. But our deen is being attacked. And I don't think most people realize it. And for the ones who stand for that and stay loyal to that, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be the one who forgives us in the akhirah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah, Doctor, for your talk. Inshallah, let's open up now to you guys for any question and comments. If you prefer to write down your question or your comment, then there's a paper going, pad going around, inshallah, with a pen. So, inshallah.
So I came in late, so maybe you already covered it. But say I came to you, not me, but like a Muslim came to you and asked you, what's your position on what happened in Woolwich? What would you answer to?
I would say it was wrong. I'd say it has nothing to do with Islam. I'd say that actually, you know what? There's a big mistake being made here. Because if two guys who are Muslim came along and did something which was wrong, and even if they justified it according to a good intention, you can't blame that on the whole of the Muslim community. Yeah? You have on your TV Jimmy Savile, right? A white male TV presenter who committed untold crimes. You don't immediately label every white male TV presenter with the crimes of Jimmy Savile, all right? Even though a fair number of them are also guilty, you don't, of the same kind of crime, right? And you put it to them like that, and actually open a discussion with them, and say, but you know what? I know people wonder, is Islam violent, is this, but they're too afraid to ask. Let them ask. Have a cup of tea with them, and let them ask you, is Islam violent? Isn't it violent? Actually, in that pack, there is a leaflet that talks about foreign policy in Islam. Right? If you have an Islamic state, a khilafah, it'll have a foreign policy, like every state does. And like every state, part of that policy is about treaties, diplomacy, ambassadors. This was all done in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And like every state, part of that policy involves war and peace. And those ayat in the Quran, those ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, they refer to this issue of war and peace in Islam, how Islam views it. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam gave more strict laws on conduct in war than you have in any Geneva Convention. Right? So you're not denying that there is such a thing as fighting according to Islam. You're not hiding that. You're not falling into this trap of saying, no, there's just this thing called jihad al-nafs. But you're actually presenting it in a way that he can understand, or she can understand. Yeah? You're presenting it in a way. Because you know what, when your country goes to war, it actually justifies this many deaths in Afghanistan, this many deaths in Iraq. For what reason? For strategic interest, or for oil, or for gas. If any Muslim leader made war for those reasons, it would be haram. A Muslim leader is not allowed to launch jihad for oil, for gas, for mineral resources, or for strategic interests like you have. Absolutely not. Jihad fi sabilillah has strict conditions when it can be launched. Right? And so you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that you debate with them in a way nicely. Yeah? You bring better arguments. So somebody can see, and then they might go to you, well, why are these guys doing it? Well, these guys doing it because, frankly speaking, they see what happens in Muslim countries. They feel outraged, and there's nobody here to guide them, because the government policy is currently that if you talk about jihad in the mosques, you'll be labelled an extremist. You'll be labelled a preacher of hate. That's what you'll be labelled. So you tell them, not only is the policy in Afghanistan wrong, but your policy domestically makes people like these guys in the village, sadly. And that's the truth. I really believe that. I really believe if we don't actually are able to tell our young people about what is right and wrong on these issues, then you're going to have more of these things. And there's a reason why they don't want us to talk about it. If you say Woolwich is wrong, according to Islam, the same Islam tells you that people who resist occupation in Palestine, Kashmir, Iraq and Afghanistan are right. Okay? And that goes against British interests, to say that. British state interests, not the ordinary public. Okay, so, so if they have this problem. Either you allow Muslims to speak from Islam, in which case you'll say, this is wrong, but this is right. Or you have to silence people, you have to say it's all wrong. Okay, and then jihad is just jihad al-nafs. Okay, which is, I think, what Ghulam Mirza Ahmed said, right? Who was also a very good protege of the British back in centuries gone past. It's the same game. Okay, it's the same game, right? Because in those days as well, they labelled the people that resisted British occupation in India as extremists. Okay? And the ulama that stood up and said, we can't accept this occupation. We have to resist it and fight, and made jihad. They were labelled the extremists and the terrorists of their time. So they paid and promoted new ulama to come out with writings to say it's haram to rebel against the British. And they did that. And it's the same game, basically. And you have to actually, if you have that dialogue with people, go and get them to read their own history. They'll learn something. Most people are very ignorant of their own history.
Brother, Jazakallah khair for the talk. Bit of an eye-opener. My question is, you've set the scene very nicely, and we have to distinguish between the sort of middle ground and either that or this. We can't have those. I fully agree. My question would be, how do we sort of create a platform at a local level? And I'm talking about our community leaders, our ordinary Joe public, our youngsters, our eldest, our sisters. Where do we create these opportunities so we can actually and honestly debate like the way you said?
Yeah. The ideal situation would be in a mosque, isn't it? Because these are supposed to be the community centre where you learn, where you discuss, where you debate. But you're going to get big pressures on you from mosques. You're going to get pressures from the council and the police, and the committees are usually, riddled with division, so you'll never get agreement, right? But there's two approaches. Either you hire other spaces to have such frank discussions about this sort of thing, right, where you address these things, or actually in those towns I said, Birmingham, Stoke, and in central London, when they did these kind of exhibitions, you know what? In Birmingham, I think they said most of the 12,000 were Muslims, right, and several hundred were non-Muslims. The non-Muslims came out thinking, you know what, I've learned so much about Islam today. Okay. The Muslims came out saying, you know what, I've learned so much about Islam today. So the Muslims could actually understand more about their deen than this is a fantastic way, and in fact it's giving knowledge to everyone. And the challenge, I gave a similar talk to this, but in a lot more passionate and angry kind of way in Whitechapel 2 weeks ago. Okay, I deliberately invited two non-Muslims I know too, because I wanted to actually see two things. One is, I have to talk about this issue honestly, okay, without fear of what they think of me. And I know them well, and they should know what I believe and what I think. At the same time, I wanted to know, you know what, if I say this truthfully and honestly, will they think I'm a nutter? Or will they understand the point I'm trying to make, even though I'm talking to a Muslim community audience? And both of them came away saying, no, we understand the point. Actually, said there's a problem. If you're not allowed to speak like this in your communities, there's a problem. So they actually, I think you'll find there is a way we can address most things. I say most things, because there are some issues in Islam which we believe in, from Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which if you say to them, we believe in X, Y, and Z, they will find it very difficult to accept that. A few things. I found that with my discussions with these non-Muslims. Even things like hudud punishments, they can accept that. Most Daily Mail readers would love it if you cut off the hands of thieves, right, in this country. Yeah, because they hate the crime. They have a problem. They have all these prison sentences, this and that, but still crime goes up and up and up, right? So these things they can deal with. Jihad, even these things they can understand it. There are a few issues which they find very difficult to understand, but in the end, we have to agree to disagree. Lakum dinukum waliya din. To your deen, this is our deen. Yeah, and that's the way the Prophet ﷺ dealt with it.
Yeah. 2-3 points I will mention. One about the green correction you were saying about the American think tank talk about how the Muslim they were divided in 4 categories.
Yes.
And they really don't like 2 categories, which is all in the internet as well, which is a very good point here. We Muslim all should read about all this one. They're all following the Henry Kissinger plan, how they divide the Muslim. Secondly, recently both the bad thing happened. One the other one in Wales, the girl got killed. April was a pedophile.
Yes.
When they all come in the media, they're all talking about root cause problem of that girl, how the internet, how the people get pedophile with the internet. So on these issues, they go on the root cause problem.
Yes.
When the issue comes to here,
Yeah.
they never talk about that. They never ask when they went that the biggest protest in London, never had in their history.
Yeah.
Or non-Muslim people came and protested against
Yes.
to stop going in a war. My question is that their media already brainwashed the normal English people.
Yes.
So what's the
How do you
what's
deal
your
with
advice?
that?
How do you open that?
Okay. So you've got two kinds of normal English people now. You've
Yeah.
got the kind that are brainwashed and
Yeah.
are convinced that every Muslim is a terrorist in waiting.
Mm.
And you have another group of people who actually think,
Mm.
you know what, they can't all be bad.
Mm.
All right? And there is amongst non-Muslim people a significant number of people who have this view that, you know what, in any society, not all that group of, how can 1 billion people, Muslims around the world, how can they all be bad? Yeah, they just can't get there, even though the evidence presented them from the media is very hostile and does make them nervous, right? There's a lot out there who think, you know what, and so the more they engage with you as individuals, and this is another reason for us to go out and make da'wah. Look, what's the example of the Prophet ﷺ? You look at the Sahaba, some of them, they came to Mecca and were warned against this man who's preaching, against the Quraysh idols and their religion and their way of life. Don't go near him. He's a madman. He's a soothsayer. He's a magician, they said. Okay, so when they met this man who was accused of all these things, yeah, they found something very different. They found the best of men and they found the best of messages. All right? The contrast between the propaganda and the real life was so big, many of them became Muslim. Right? And I think that's something we need to bear in mind. And in fact, there's a beautiful story. Many of you must have seen it in Holland. The most disgusting party in Holland, the one with this guy Geert Wilders as the leader, the guy with the crazy blonde hair, yeah, who says the most vile things about Islam and about Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His deputy in that party, less than a year ago, embraced Islam. SubhanAllah. This year, you might have seen, go and Google it. It's like Dutch politician embraces Islam. He went to Medina and he was in front of the resting place of Prophet ﷺ, begging forgiveness for all the wrong he did and wrong he made against him. And he's also he's a Dutch politician from that background, right, from the most hostile anti-Islamic party. And I got told by a brother 2 weeks ago that there's some ex-soldier who was part of the English Defence League who's become Muslim in this country. Right? I got told that. I haven't met the guy. But, so you will find these people there. And honestly, I believe if 59 million people in this country, that's it, 59,999,999 still are hostile to Islam, and one embraces Islam. For me, that's the whole world. That's, honestly speaking, why would I? That's worth it. That even that number of people who are convinced is worth it, because in the end, Allah's going to be the judge of who was right and who was wrong. Okay, and I think the media is brainwashing people, but people don't always trust the media. Who's going to? Nobody else is going to speak on our behalf. I'm not going to spend.
It's for everybody going www.bbc.com.
Yeah, well, the Sun is not going to start speaking up for me, and the BBC is not going to start speaking up to me. I have to speak up for myself, and you and me have to speak up for Islam. Right? That's the fundamental thing. You and me have to speak up for Islam. Right? I have to speak up for myself. I'm not going to apologize for what I believe in. Okay? People don't like that. That's their problem. I think my beliefs are very reasonable, very rational, actually. That's another thing. They think we're irrational. They think that, some brothers, they went out and made a video, asked people, who do you think is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Said, he's your God, isn't he? Yeah. So how wrong can you be? Yeah? Of all the statements you could make about how wrong could you possibly be? Yeah? Then people are very ignorant about Islam. All right? And that's partly our fault, actually. We don't tell them.
I would agree with you to the extent that sometimes we don't tell them. I think there's also a problem that sometimes when we do, the messages that they receive from us are quite mixed.
Yeah.
To give an example, there were some Muslim organisations that were very forthright in showing condemnation for what happened at Woolwich.
Yes.
Throw over stone, they were more than happy to come out and apologise for it. Whereas other Muslim organisations were far less apologetic and far more discussing the issue for what it was. And I think that's a paradox, or that's a, shall I say, a microcosm of the greater issue, is that Muslims, when they do engage with the community hears different things from different people on different issues. And that's just a wider confusion for non-Muslims and the general Muslim community even in and of itself. So how would you go about tackling the problem of just these different views that seem to be out there?
The different views are driven by different things, okay? And really the views that confuse people are the ones they end up hearing on the TV and stuff and in the newspapers. So you're talking about people at national level organisations or speakers. And I know these people, yeah? I know them personally. I love them as my Muslim brothers, but honestly speaking, many of them are spectacularly politically naive. Okay, they really don't understand the way that politicians here work, and they come out with these kind of statements, sometimes thinking they're doing something good, not realising that actually they're providing the excuse for the next anti-Muslim policy that's going to come in. Yeah. Okay, because if you just think about it this way, all right. Non-Muslims, you said, are suspicious about. They've been brainwashed against. They have, right? What do you think they think goes on in our mosques? What do you actually think they think we do in the masjid? Yeah. They haven't a clue. They think that there are people sitting in there plotting the next Woolwich. Okay. And wallahi, I am fairly convinced that nobody in this room has ever encountered anyone, right, who thinks like that. Right? Which means there isn't a problem in the Muslim community as a community. It means that there will be certain individuals that will do things. So our brothers who are in some of these prominent organisations, they actually don't see that when they say we have to get rid of extremism in our community, what they're saying is we have an extremism problem in our community and we have to get rid of it. This is a disaster, because actually you've just reinforced the opinion of all the people out there that in your mosques there is an extremism problem. Yeah, there is they don't see it though. That's fundamentally that's part of it. And you can talk to them and try and convince them, but you're trying to convince people who are too trusting, right, and too naive, and also who have people whispering in their ears who have a hostile intention. Now, most of the people you hear coming on TV, they're not actually, many of them are not bad people, but they have bad people whispering to them as well. So it's very difficult, all right? And in fact, every mosque should be clear how it addresses. Before it acts and issues its statement, it should think. It should think. It can say, we totally dissociate ourselves with what happened in Woolwich. We believe this is not the right way Islam mandates change. Okay? However, we will tell you there is no extremism problem in our community as you is being described. These are individuals who acted as individuals. All right? Don't assume that there's a problem there. And then the media will come in, oh, you're in denial. No, we're not in denial. You're confused. You come into our mosque and see what we do here. This is what we do. I took one non-Muslim into a mosque in Hounslow a few years ago. First time he'd ever been to a masjid in his life. So he was very interested. In Hounslow Mosque, they've got a big plaque on the wall of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's last khutbah. So when he read that, he said, okay, so that's immediately, he said, that's 3 myths that have completely been cleared in my mind, just by reading that one thing on the wall. But I swear, many of them believe that what's going on in this mosque is like you've got, jihad training, ready for plotting and plan. It's just crazy, but we reinforce that.
But you've got a certain influential person,
Yes.
like the Jewish group,
Yes.
who stir a lot of things,
Yeah.
influences the ministers and
Yeah.
MPs and
Yeah.
governments
Yeah.
to stir things
Yeah.
to be against Muslims.
You definitely, that's true. You have a lot of people out there that will deliberately stir it. But the problem, the real problem you've got, brother, is that that stirring they did, whether it's the think tanks I mentioned or other lobbies, the Israel lobby and these people, that stirring, they did it about 10, 12 years ago. And the problem you've got now is you've got people that come on with Muslim names, with brown faces, who may even be kuffar, they might be Hafiz Quran, right? And they'll come on the media and they're promoted and they will say the same thing. We have an extremism problem in our community. The problem is with the extremism. The problem isn't the foreign policy of the British government. And we've come a long way in 12 years. Before the think tanks could write this stuff, and only a few people and the politicians were listening. Now they've got their new Ghulam Mirza Ahmeds, basically, who come and they come to them. And you know, if you're a non-Muslim and somebody who you think is a Muslim is coming to you and is telling you all this stuff about you've got this problem, these Muslims are bad and these Muslims are extreme and these are Muslim and that Imam is extreme, you're going to think, well, you know what, he's telling me, he must be right. Maybe the Daily Mail is wrong, maybe the Sun is wrong, but maybe David Cameron's wrong, but he must be right. And they're, by far and away, actually, they're the most poisonous thing in the modern day, actually. Because it confuses Muslims and it confuses non-Muslims.
I had a question. What type of countermeasures could we expect as a community now that the government may sort of take forward? And what would that look like? And how as a community should we address this issue and
Yeah. This part of the government policy is called the PREVENT strategy. They call it for preventing terrorism. And it was started by the Labour government and it's been increased under this government. And it's very cunning, all right? The way it works is it doesn't rely on any law. What is extremism? There's no definition of extremism. So you can't send somebody to jail for being an extremist because nobody's defined what is extremism. I can stand here and talk about jihad and khilafah and sharia and ummah, and they can say I'm an extremist, but they can't send me to jail for that under the law. They can send me to jail if they think I'm encouraging people to actually go out and do something violent, but that's the law for anyone, Muslim or non-Muslim. Okay, so the way it works is by fear. Right? So a mosque that invites somebody to come and speak about this issue will get a visit by the local police. And they'll say, or a hall or a centre, the manager will get a visit from, oh, do you know that there's the person you've invited to be, that's an extremist. Okay, now to an average person, that word means like he's almost a terrorist, basically. So you're inviting a terrorist, you're doing something wrong by letting him use this venue. That's the kind of way, and in fact this is the same way that in America in the 1950s and 60s they smeared anyone who they wanted to by saying they were communist. Yeah? So if you ever, like the paranoia got so big that people were suspecting everyone of being a communist. And that's the way it's going to go. There might be some actual measures in mosques. Most mosques are registered charities, so it means the charities law controls what a mosque can and can't do. And so the Charities Commission has a lot of powers, and you might see that increased in the way they deal with that. You'll see it in schools, definitely, when I talk to my kids who are in a mainstream school, the kind of ideas that are pushed there are very confusing for young people and young Muslims. A lot of the talk about changing the history curriculum, right? So, some of the things about India and stuff like that, the occupation of India for 150, 200 years, they want to whitewash that from history because, rather than saying we did wrong, and we took all the riches from there and we left it in a mess, and with border disputes and everything, they want to just whitewash that from history and talk about other things. So there's a lot of issues in schools actually, which is a whole different discussion, to be honest with you, and something every parent should be aware of. But that will be more. I don't think, the big legal sticks, they might use some, they might do, but I think the feeling is more in the way if you can do it by bullying people, using police and using
What kind of ideas are they pushing in schools now?
That's another talk, really, honestly. Wallahi, there's a lot. And the ideas they're pushing in schools are not, to be honest, they're not specific to this terrorism agenda, right? There are ideas which are very problematic for a Muslim and for a young Muslim, but they've mixed this, what they call the integration strategy in Britain, with their anti-terrorism strategy. So they have a strategy of how to assimilate people, how to westernize them, like Civitas said, okay, how to accept. And that's happening in the schools, right? And that's for Muslim and non-Muslim kids, because actually they recognize that even the non-Muslim kids don't have a set of values to hold on to. Actually our school, Muslim schools, are very good because we have a very clear idea of what is tarbiyah, what's right and wrong. They don't have that in mainstream schools. They try to avoid that. They don't like morality, right? It's too religious for them. So they avoid that. But they notice there's a mess now, because they've got young generations have no idea of what's right and wrong. So they're trying to get these ideas. So I gave you an example. In universities, they say that if you have a gathering like this, and there's sisters on one side, brothers on the other, that's extremism. Right? So the idea they push from a very young age is the mixing of the sexes is a good thing. So from my kids will tell you that almost from day one in school, when the kids get together, the boys just naturally sit with the boys and the girls just naturally sit with the girls. And then the teacher says, right, let's all change places, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, and they'll sit them like that. It happens, yeah? It happens in school. And you'd think, why? Actually, even their own education data shows that in single-sex environments, people learn better. There's less distraction. There's less fitna, right? But actually, they have this thing. This is like, for them, it's almost like a religious thing. You have to mix up. And so that kind of thing, that comes from the classroom, okay? When I was at school a long time ago, that was not something pushed in a classroom. Honestly, that wasn't. They just accepted the way things. Now it's actually pushed by the teachers. And when you get segregation of boys and girls, men and women in Islamic atmospheres, they say that's a problem. They see it inherently, they say that is a problem. Why? Because they say that's almost like making the women inferior. How? I don't know. How, if you have sisters here and brothers here, that would be inferior? I don't know. Yeah? It doesn't make sense. Okay, you can say, you could argue if you banished women, if you like, but we're talking about just separation. We're not talking about anything more than that. These are the kind of, they're pushed in society, and they are big, and that's now a definition of extremism. Boris Johnson said that, as I said in his article, went from Woolwich to these Islamic ideas of jihad, sharia, khilafa, ummah, and he said those university Islamic societies that encourage segregation of men and women, we have to root these kind of ideas out. And this is the kind of language they use. And they're linking that to what happened in Woolwich. Gives you some idea of what we're facing.
Yes.
So, what advice would you give to those of us who are trying to encourage the kind of stakeholders in the masjid to get them to see that this is a discussion that has to be had publicly,
Yes.
and definitely needs to be had in the masjid too, because there are some places you can go, and alhamdulillah, the masjid is very nice, and the facilities are very good, but there's little activity there, and sometimes it can seem quite difficult to encourage more intellectual activity to take place within the masjid. And there wouldn't be anything necessarily wrong with even the Imam, who's always there as well, addressing that subject. Like we said, if people actually knew the ahkam to do in jihad, we'd actually be in a much better position in terms of what's going on within the community, but definitely what's being said and what's being done with regards to our da'wah, the non-Muslims. So my question is, what advice would you give to us regarding approaching those people who are, like I say, the key stakeholders in the masjid, to encourage them to be having these discussions? At least to be opening up the masjid to these discussions.
So the first thing is keep on trying, keep on trying, keep on trying. You know, you have to be persistent in that. The second thing is, don't let their inaction stop other people from doing actions. So actually the brothers in Birmingham and in London, the brothers in Birmingham had cooperation from a mosque. The brothers in Stoke had no cooperation from a mosque, actually. The mosques there all didn't want to touch this. So they just got off their own initiative and they organised it themselves. The third thing is, when you engage, keep engaging with these mosque committees. Don't make a fight, don't make a fitna. That's the last thing to do. But speak to them nicely. Be conscious of the fact they are all very scared. All right? An imam should know better and should fear Allah more than he should fear the local authorities. Yes? And these ayat of Quran that I've mentioned from Surah Ahzab, my imam in the local mosque, he mentions these almost every week in his khutbah. Almost every week. This ittaqullah is like universal in every mosque and khutbah. Fear Allah is universal, and then usually follow it with qulu qawlan sadida in our mosque. Yeah? So it's not unusual for these ayat to be mentioned. Those words should mean a lot to an average imam. And you should remind them of that. And collectively remind them, you know what, uncle, brother, if you don't do this, then the next time something happens, we are responsible, frankly. You shouldn't blame a mosque that these things happen because of what the mosque did. You should blame the mosque for what these things because of what the mosque didn't do. Yeah, because the mosque was silent on the issue that is troubling millions of Muslims in this country. How can you be silent on these issues? Yeah, and somebody has to give the right message, the truthful message, and be bold and help them. Sometimes help them with arguments to how to word it. Some people don't always have the ability to word things well.
I have a written question here. Suppose I want a pin. Okay, I'll read it out. My question is around the media publication shortly after the Woolwich murder and the subsequent headlines about it being jihad and Islam. The word jihad, I feel, has been misinterpreted in modern society, i.e. the Islamic translation of jihad is to strive or struggle. Would it not be an idea to promote the actual meaning or aspect to the non-Muslim community so that their thought pattern deviates from the opinion that the word jihad is attributed to or means holy war, in turn connecting that negativity to Islam? And if so, why have we as the Muslim community allowed the misguided interpretation to be believed or accepted for so long?
Yeah. Well, this is one of many issues that we have to address without question, and you can't shy away from it. You have to address it. It's on people's minds. People know, it's one of the only things people know about Islam, that there's something called jihad associated with it. And even then they have a misconception about it. So the argument that jihad is just jihad nafs, you know, there's a huge problem with this, right? Because literally all somebody has to do is open up translation and they'll find ayat, which, if you argue that, people just think you're a liar, frankly. Yeah? You just think you're a liar, or you're ignorant of your own deen. So how do you explain these verses? So we have to actually address these as part of the issue. You have to understand that people want to know about this stuff. And Muslims are ignorant of this stuff, and non-Muslims want to know about what you believe about these things. And Personally, I think on all these issues, when you understand your deen, you have more confidence that your view on these things is better than theirs. When I understand jihad fi sabilillah, I have more confidence that Islam's view on war and peace is better than any other view on war and peace that you ever. Because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has to be, right? That's one, right? But even when you look at it in black and white, it's, honestly speaking, it is, you know, it is something that I'll argue is better than any other system, any other way. We're not allowed to fight for all the reasons that they go to war for. Yeah? Frankly, we don't go to war for oil and gas and these kind of things. You can't kill for these reasons in Islam. Okay? And that, you know, I think that's, the more you know about your deen, frankly, the more you feel confident to say, you know what, we actually have it better. We have it better, we have a better way of life. And I wish you would look at it and actually look and see what it's about.
Any more questions? Inshallah, we'll end it there. Jazakallah khairan all for attending. Hope you found it beneficial, and inshallah that you ponder on what's been said and take this discussion further. Just to make you aware that at the back of the room, the dial table at the end, we have a contact sheet. If you wouldn't mind, if you could put your...
Sorry, quick question.
Oh, sorry.
I was wondering, so nowadays what you find is among the Muslim community, majority of them are quite scared to even practice their religion publicly.
Yes.
Do you understand? And they're quite private about their religion. So what would you say, what would your advice be to like a silent Muslim, so he just practices it in his house, when he goes outside he will just be the, you know, be a suitable British citizen?
It's a real issue. It's a real issue, and the answer I'd give is two. One is a principle answer, all right, and one is a practical answer. Okay, in practice, people are really affected by the company they keep. Right, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you know, if you keep the company of the blacksmith, you'll smell of the blacksmith's workshop. And if you keep the company of the musk seller, you'll smell of the perfume. Okay, so the more you can encourage and stay close to such people, as long as you don't get dragged down, right? As long as you keep your own principles and your own iman and Islam, the more you stay close to somebody, the more you can affect them. All right? And if people go through ups and downs in life, when you're very young, you mainly have ups. Right? All it takes is somebody in your family to get sick, somebody to have a crisis, somebody to fall ill, somebody to pass away, and this makes people start thinking again and thinking differently. And if you're there, if you're their brother, if you're their friend, then actually you can be the one who shows them and guides them. Okay, that's the first thing. So that's a practical issue, right? In principle, the more you understand about Islam, now, because this, I don't like to say there's another person who fears and it's like that. All of us are human beings. All of us can fear the effect of how people blame us and stuff. The more you understand Islam, the more you read Quran, even you read Quran in the meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says so many times, do you fear them or fear me? Yeah? The more certain you are of your deen, the more you will stay steadfast to it. I know a brother who was thrown in prison for something he never did wrong. Right, and in a foreign country, in a Muslim country, and he's tested and tested and tested to give up his Islam. In fact, if he gave up his Islam, he would have been a free man. Okay, so he came to Islam through consciously realizing, you know, do I believe Allah exists? It's a question, honest question. Do I believe Allah exists? When he was convinced of that question, yes, I believe. Not just because my parents told me, not just because my friends told me, because I'm convinced this world can't just come out of nowhere. Something has to have created it. He came to Islam by saying, do I believe this Quran is the word of Allah? Right? And when he became convinced, you know what? For 1400, this Quran says in it, if anyone can bring a surah like it, and Surah Al-Kawthar is just 10 words. Okay, so if anyone can write 10 words of the equivalent, then this will prove the Quran is a lie. Okay, and if in 1,400 years nobody's managed to do that, right, I don't believe it can happen. So this is somebody who doesn't even speak Arabic or understand Quran that he hears recited. When he comes to Islam with that conviction, and those ayat that he believes in tells him there's going to be a day of judgment, and tells him Allah's going to test you, and Allah's going to count you. When you get those doubts, and you come to that, you will go back to those steps, and go back step by step, and answer them step by step. And you'll come back to the point saying, you know what, I'd rather take the abuse from people around me than I would take the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah? And those things kind of keep you more steadfast. My kids, I don't know how old you guys are, but my kids, they tell me that in their school, there are the Muslims who go to the prayer room and pray, and those who just muck about. And you know, some non-Muslims who actually get interested in Islam, they take Islam less seriously because of the ones who don't practice. They actually look and they say, you know what, how can I believe in what this guy's saying if he's such a waster? Yeah, they actually come to look at the ones who are a little bit more. And in fact, in their school, 2 non-Muslims who are aged 13 embraced Islam, just because they saw the atmosphere amongst the Muslims who regularly pray and regularly practice their deen. So I mean, that's quite a big deal actually. 13-year-olds in this climate who actually become convinced of something is not an easy thing.
What do you think Muslims are falling behind media war?
Yeah. Yes. No question about it. We are falling behind. But
What can we do about it?
well, we can do our best to engage with the mainstream media, but you have to understand the mainstream media is it's not there to give a honest picture of the world. It's there to give a picture of the world that the directors, editors, and owners want there to be. Okay, so you can and you should try and engage with them. And actually, some brothers have a very good. One brother I know, he's excellent. He phones up Radio 5 Live all the time for the phone-ins. He's got it down to a fine art. When they answer the phone, he says something really radical. I think these people in Woolwich, they have a point, like this, he start this. So then the producer gets it, hang on a second, okay, we'll get you on in just a minute. He says, so then when he comes, he's a lawyer, then when he comes on, he makes a really excellent point, which it's a very good point, very firm point, but very, on it. And so you can do those we should do those kind of things. We should get better at actually how you engage in the media. But actually, the media can't substitute for live contact. Yeah. Actually, people trust people they know. And if you, in your work, with your neighbours, you deal in a certain way, if you in your mosque open the door to let people ask questions about Islam and come in and tell them, honestly, people take that much more than what they read in the Daily Mail and the Sun and these kind of things. Really, they will.
Any more questions? Okay, so inshallah we shall end there. Jazakallah khairan once again for attending. I was going to say, just to make you aware that at the back of the room you have a contact sheet, so if you wouldn't mind, if you don't mind, put down your email details so we can keep you updated with future events and future activity, inshallah. I'd like to thank Dr. Abdul Wahid for coming down quite far to join us today. And inshallah, I hope you found this all beneficial and that you take this discussion further. And inshallah, refreshments are about to be served, so hopefully we can continue this further. I'll ask Dr. Abdul Wahid to do dua, inshallah.
ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين أعوذ بالله من من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
ليعلو الكتاب ويخبو سواه وينصر جندا ألحوا الدعاء. ليعلو الكتاب ويخبو سواه وينصر جندا ألحوا الدعاء. ألحوا الدعاء.